Absolutely. Yes, Your Honor. Has anyone coerced, threatened, or pressured you into signing away these constitutional protections? Nobody has, Your Honor. Are you confessing to actually carrying out these specific crimes?
I am, Your Honor. Moving on to the first charge involving Donald Meyer, did you purposefully execute a certain action?
The record indicates you wielded a firearm, specifically a pistol or revolver, firing a fatal round that directly resulted in his passing. Is my statement accurate? Yes, Your Honor. Was this a deliberate and premeditated act on your part? Yes, Your Honor. Furthermore, were you fully aware that pulling the trigger would definitively end his life? Yes, Your Honor. Regarding the second charge concerning Tatiana Kasap, I will ask you identical questions. Did you make a physical move? Did you discharge a weapon with the direct outcome of ending her life? I did, Your Honor. Was that your ultimate goal, sir? Yes, Your Honor. So you are formally confessing to executing both of these brutal murders? Yes, Your Honor. Nikita currently remains locked up at the Waukesha County Jail, anticipating his final judgment date set for Thursday, March 5th, 2026. The presiding magistrate might show leniency, allowing for early release potential once he serves 20 years per charge of murder in the first degree. Nevertheless, the state's attorney emphasized that they plan to aggressively pursue the harshest penalty allowed. In all reality, this young Moldovan immigrant, someone who previously possessed immense promise, will undoubtedly spend the remainder of his days inside a penitentiary cell. Our entire team wishes to extend our most profound and heartfelt sympathies to the grieving relatives of those who were tragically lost. Out-of-state relatives phoned in a welfare check for a man named Donald S. Mayer, whose birth year was 1973, along with his spouse and teenage boy. In just a few moments, the officers arriving at the scene are going to stumble upon an absolutely horrific sight. They will find the rotting remains of both Donald Mayer and his spouse, Tatiana. Unbeknownst to the authorities, the pair's adolescent boy, Nikita, had recently cohabited with their dead corpses for several weeks. This 17-year-old was a high-achieving scholar harboring massive dreams. Over a period of several months, the youth collaborated with a digital syndicate to orchestrate a highly complex plot. This entire operation drew heavy inspiration from the notorious Unabomber Ted Kaczynski. And with the suspect already long gone, law enforcement faced a desperate sprint to catch the fugitive before anyone else got killed. Investigators strongly suspect they understand exactly what occurred here and the precise timeline of events. The actual motive behind this tragedy remains a complete mystery, meaning you are the sole individual holding those answers right now. Ultimately, this narrative belongs entirely to you. The boy came into the world on September 19th, 2007, originating from Moldova, which is a tiny European nation wedged right between Ukraine to the north and east and Romania, covering the southern and western borders. However, his mother and father eventually went their separate ways. The kid's destiny shifted dramatically back in 2015 after his mom, Tatiana, connected with Donald Meyer through a global matchmaking website. The two adults sparked an immediate romance, prompting the American man to book a flight out to Moldova so he could meet both the mother and her child face to face. Throughout the following 12 months, the couple rendezvoused across Europe multiple times, culminating in a 2017 overseas trip where he finally tied the knot with Tatiana in her home country. Later that same year, the newlywed bride and her son relocated to America, settling into Donald's luxurious residence situated in Waukesha, Wisconsin, which sits a brief drive away from the heart of Milwaukee. Relocating across the globe understandably posed a significant hurdle for the 10-year-old immigrant. Nevertheless, the young boy adapted to the monumental shift in scenery as smoothly as anyone could realistically hope for. The teenager officially gained his United States citizenship status by 2021, subsequently enrolling at Waukesha West High School the very next fall. Educators describe the student as incredibly respectful and diligent, noting his active participation in numerous extracurricular organizations once the final bell rang. During his 11th grade year, the pupil never missed a single day of class, earned a prestigious monthly award from the campus health program, and had already started his application for the National Honor Society. Despite these glowing academic achievements, the adolescent remained fairly isolated from his peers. For reasons nobody quite understands, his caretakers adamantly refused to allow the young man to obtain his driving permit. Just as any normal kid would, the teenager grew incredibly bitter regarding the tight leash his guardians kept him on. Lacking a vehicle severely restricted his ability to hang out with classmates after hours, breeding a constant, simmering hostility inside the household among the trio. It was practically inevitable that the lonely kid would seek refuge inside digital forums to find the connection missing from his physical reality. Gradually, this intelligent and outwardly normal foreign-born student experienced a profound, dark evolution, completely hidden from the public eye. His mother and stepfather remained completely clueless regarding the boy's secret life right up until federal agents showed up unannounced at their doorstep in 2023. As you might expect, this situation was incredibly jarring. The Guardians were absolutely blindsided when law enforcement revealed an ongoing probe into questionable, illicit web traffic tracing directly back to a family laptop. Sadly, further specifics regarding that federal inquiry remain sealed from the public since authorities ultimately decided to close the file without pressing charges. However, it is abundantly clear that the terrifying brush with federal law enforcement failed to deter the troubled youth. On the contrary, surviving the ordeal likely bolstered his confidence and pushed him down the extremist rabbit hole at an even faster pace. Several months down the line, operating under the alias Awoken, the teen initiated contact with a highly secretive neo-Nazi organization called the Order of the Nine Angels. The faction, often abbreviated as O9A, heavily pushed the extreme philosophy of accelerationism. Simply put, this ideology argues that modern Western civilization is broken beyond repair and must be violently overthrown to pave the way for a brand new cultural system. This specific extremist cult supposedly originated out of the United Kingdom somewhere around the 1960s or 70s. The teenage boy, however, reportedly maintained contact with Russian operatives, or at the very least, he believed the individuals on the other side of the screen were from Russia. Regardless of their true identities, the youth actively chatted with fellow O9A members across social media platforms between December 6th and 8th of 2024. During a specific digital conversation, the boy brought up Charles Manson, casually noting that his guardians would confiscate his devices if they ever discovered his online activities. Then he popped up on Telegram a few weeks later using the handle Accelerationist. The disturbed young man actually inquired about who the media might pin the blame on should his violent schemes come to fruition. Not long after that exchange, the radicalized teenager bragged about penning his very own ideological manifesto. Following this discussion, the teen reached out to a mysterious figure dubbed Angel of Death, seeking to buy an explosive dropping drone and specialized ear protection designed to muffle blasts from a .357 Magnum firearm. It is absolutely undeniable that the suspect possessed intellect far surpassing the typical 17-year-old kid. Therefore, the boy completely understood the critical need for absolute discretion. Yet, falling into the classic trap of teenage adolescence, the suspect simply lacked the self-control to keep his mouth shut when trying to impress a pretty girl. Somewhere around the end of January or the beginning of February in 2025, the boastful student confessed his sinister blueprint to a female peer at his high school. Nobody is quite sure whether the young woman genuinely believed his terrifying claims or simply brushed them off as the foolish, egotistical ramblings of a teenage boy seeking attention. Right before sprinting to his next period, he made it crystal clear that spilling his dark secret would guarantee her total ruin. Nobody really knows whether Nikita genuinely believed he could pull off such an incredibly wicked scheme. Realistically speaking, the odds of a flat-broke 17-year-old without even a driver's permit taking out a commander-in-chief seem totally impossible, let alone toppling the entire United States government while acting as the lone savior for some twisted racial supremacy crusade. Even so, he pushed forward and ultimately figured out that his mom and stepdad possessed a few essential resources he was dying to get his hands on, while recognizing that securing those assets meant he had to permanently remove both of them from the picture. From that moment forward, Tatiana and Donald were stripped of their humanity in his eyes, reduced to mere stepping stones for his grand vision, which kicked off when he completely vanished from his campus on Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. Ditching classes was a massive red flag for a kid who had literally never missed a single day before this incident. His sudden absence from homeroom served as the initial domino to topple on that tragic afternoon, though a whole lot more chaos was coming. To put it bluntly, the bloody nightmare unfolding inside their residence right then was absolutely gut-wrenching, kicking off a chaotic stretch over the ensuing week where Nikita kept turning in his homework online just to keep the faculty completely off his back and blissfully unaware of the gruesome reality. Out in Massachusetts, Donald's mom started panicking over the sudden radio silence from her normally talkative boy, prompting her to relentlessly blow up his phone with calls and messages to ensure the household was safe. She finally received a brief text from his number claiming he desperately needed a temporary detox from all electronics. The message promised they were doing great, but her gut screamed that a horrific tragedy was unfolding behind the scenes. Her paranoia skyrocketed shortly after, mainly because the follow-up text completely lacked her son's typical phrasing and usual casual banter. As fate would have it, she definitely was not the only person receiving incredibly bizarre digital replies from that specific mobile device. Beginning on February 13th, his supervisor started getting strange texts claiming a severe illness was keeping him out of the office and making voice calls absolutely impossible. His anxious mother desperately tried to be patient for almost 2 weeks, but right around 9:45 on the morning of Friday, February 28th, she snapped. Picking up the phone, she begged the Waukesha Sheriff's dispatchers to send someone over to the Cedar Hills Drive property for a mandatory safety sweep. The 911 dispatcher instantly relayed the chilling rundown to the patrol units heading out to that specific neighborhood. They noted that an out-of-town relative was demanding an immediate checkup on Donald S. Meyer, born in 1973, along with his spouse and their high schooler. The frantic grandmother had just been contacted by the local campus, learning her grandson had practically dropped off the face of the earth weeks ago. Furthermore, the terrified relative hadn't heard a single peep from anybody living at that address for roughly 14 days. Coincidentally, local law enforcement fielded a second tip regarding the Meyer household that very afternoon, courtesy of a Waukesha High principal worried about Nikita's mysterious 2-week vanishing act. The caller confirmed the kid boasted a completely flawless academic record until recently, making this unexcused 14-day disappearance incredibly alarming, especially since no guardian had bothered phoning in an excuse for his absence. Right around that same time frame, the teenager was busy snapping a bunch of selfies while aggressively brandishing his stepdad's Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum from the street. The Meyer residence appeared perfectly normal, prompting the arriving patrolmen to pound on the front door while loudly announcing their presence. Greeted by pure silence, the officers decided to circle the entire perimeter in hopes of discovering an unlocked back door or an unlatched screen. Finding the place locked up tight as a drum, the cops finally had no choice but to physically breach the entrance. The exact second that door swung open, the overwhelming and sickening stench of rotting bodies violently assaulted their senses. A quick sweep revealed 51-year-old Donald Meyer dumped on his study floor, hidden under some blankets and bizarrely circled by a bunch of unlit candles. The massive trauma made things tough to analyze, but investigators easily spotted what appeared to be a huge bullet hole straight through his skull. Continuing their grim search, officers soon stumbled across his 35-year-old mother Tatiana's lifeless body, which reports claim was sprawled out near the second-floor master suite or possibly the corridor. Regardless of the exact spot, she was also buried under bed sheets and absolutely riddled with bullets, while the teenage son, their pet dog Toby, and a silver Volkswagen SUV were nowhere to be found. Eyewitnesses living next door quickly informed the detectives that the kid had sped off in his stepdad's vehicle right around daybreak on Monday, February 24th. This grim timeline meant a highly dangerous suspect with a history of federal scrutiny now had a massive 4-day jump on the authorities. By the time detectives finally traced the locations of all 3 family cell phones, the digital signals bounced back from Cheyenne, Wyoming, sitting over 1,000 miles or 1,610 kilometers away. Law enforcement kept tapping into those cellular towers for the next few days just to map out the fleeing killer's exact cross-country path. Nobody could figure out if the kid was just joyriding randomly or aggressively, following a meticulously crafted getaway map But his wild road trip definitely tore through Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Colorado, and Wyoming, eventually landing in the quiet community of Waukene, Kansas, deep in the evening on February 28th, occurring just hours after his parents' gruesome remains were officially uncovered. Right around 11:25 at night, a small-town cop spotted a silver Volkswagen crossover rocking Wisconsin tags blowing straight through an intersection near Interstate 7. Thanks to Waukesha County detectives acting fast, that specific SUV was already flagged as completely hot in the National Crime Database. The crucial police bulletin explicitly warned every patrolman on the highway that the teenager behind the wheel was wanted for a double execution and was packing some serious heat. Because of this, the unaware cop patrolling through Weenie, Kansas, immediately realized trouble was brewing the moment he checked the Volkswagen's license plate. The guy behind the wheel could either punch the gas for a wild pursuit or pull over just to kick off a lethal shootout. Nerves were stretched thin while the patrolman sped toward the Atlas, flipping on his flashers and blaring the siren. A short time later, the SUV moved to the shoulder. With his weapon unholstered, the cop shouted for the suspect to exit with raised hands, and soon enough, a figure emerged into the pitch-black night. Fortunately, Nikita followed every instruction and surrendered peacefully. It wasn't until later that evening that the patrolman understood he dodged a bullet, discovering a .357 Magnum revolver sitting dangerously close to where the suspect had been sitting. Inside the vehicle, they also uncovered $14,000 in paper money, along with cell phones, debit cards, and the identification cards belonging to Donald and Tatiana. Furthermore, authorities located a heap of Tatiana's personal jewelry and Toby, the household pet. Following his return from Kansas to Wisconsin on March 11th, 2025, investigators from Waukesha County dedicated a significant chunk of time trying to get on Nikita's good side during questioning. He chatted about his routine in Waukesha, clearly boasting about his stellar academic record. Basically, you resided in Waukesha with your mother and stepfather, plus I understand you own a pup named Toby. That is correct. So, still staying over at that Cider Hills residence. Yep. All right. Attending classes over at Waukesha West. What is the vibe there? How are things going at your high school? Everything is fine. Oh yeah, solid report card. Are you an achiever? Definitely. What subjects do you actually like? Well, I guess I prefer history over everything else. Sure. Gotcha. Is there any particular aspect of your classes that you despise? Honestly, I am not entirely sure. Probably just the struggle of getting out of bed early and dragging myself there. Do you participate in any extracurricular activities? Oh, absolutely. I am part of the environmental group. Sounds good. There is also this thing called Interact, which is essentially doing unpaid charity work around the neighborhood. Ah, I see. On top of that, I joined the Future Business Leaders of America organization. They offer a bunch of various categories and subjects you can focus on. My personal pick was the cybersecurity module. Nice. Additionally, I was right in the middle of getting accepted into the National Honor Society program. Wow, your marks must be outstanding. Cool. How are your scores? Pretty decent. Where do you place among your peers? Actually, number 3 overall. Excellent. Where are you heading once graduation rolls around? I was considering going to Madison. Really? What major? I figured I would dive into a STEM field, possibly pursuing an engineering degree. However, I am not completely locked in yet. If you could land absolutely any career in the world, what would be your ultimate goal? I haven't figured that out. Honestly, the vast majority of university students have no clue either. Going into engineering requires heavy calculation skills. I am a huge fan of numbers, got it. At that stage, his interaction with the detectives felt closer to a friendly chat over coffee than an actual criminal interview. Ultimately, though, the cops needed to cut the small talk and dive into the serious matters. We are pretty confident that we understand the exact events and the timeline involved. What we lack is the motive behind everything. Understood. You are the sole individual holding those answers, including your reasons for fleeing to Kansas and taking off in the first place. Listen, I am genuinely crossing my fingers that you will explain your reasoning to me rather than just hashing out the details of the crime. Understood. You have the floor to share your perspective, keeping in mind the legal protections I just read to you. Are you open to chatting with us right now without a lawyer sitting beside you? As I mentioned earlier, You are completely free to hear my inquiries out and simply decline to respond to specific ones. Alternatively, you can tackle every single thing I throw at you, but the choice is entirely yours. You are running the show here. Wait, am I allowed to just refuse? Or is there a catch? Those are your fundamental liberties. Absolutely nobody can force you to speak. Got it. We are only going to proceed at a pace you are comfortable with. I possess zero authority to compel your testimony. Remaining completely silent is your right. You know, my main goal for this conversation, and I swear this to you, Nikita, is simply grasping the motive so I can offer some closure to your relatives back in Massachusetts, especially to your grandmother, Lydia, since I already had discussions with Robert. I reached out to Judith as well. I spoke with Tanya too. Lydia was the only one I missed. My colleague handled that call. Everyone is entirely baffled by the reasoning behind this tragedy, and they are counting on me for explanations that I simply cannot provide unless you open up. Therefore, feel free to shut this conversation down completely. Honestly, I believe I need to consult with legal counsel before going any further. No problem. That is totally your privilege. Following his decision to invoke his Miranda protections, the detectives exited the space, giving the young man time to sit in silence, reflect on his actions, and face the grim reality of his situation. A couple of hours passed before a deputy walked him through the facility, eventually moving him over to the Waukesha County Holding Center. Law enforcement missed out on the immediate admission of guilt they desperately wanted, yet as their inquiry pushed forward, officials unearthed a massive pile of incriminating clues pointing right at the teenager. To start things off, a 3-page digital document titled "Accelerate the Collapse" was discovered hidden away on his mobile device. Within those files, he discussed plots to murder the commander-in-chief, alongside potential plans to take out the second-in-command. His goal was to spark total anarchy, supposedly to rescue his own racial group from lawmakers he claimed were puppets of a Jewish agenda. That written declaration even featured a chilling phrase: "All hail the Caucasian people, all hail victory." Detectives eventually came across indoor surveillance video capturing the teen physically moving the lens inside the victim's workspace, illuminating wax tapers near the corpse, and muttering a specific sentence. He can be heard pointing out the presence of the decaying corpse right in the room. Nobody knows exactly who was on the receiving end of that conversation, though police believed he was chatting with an individual over a call, potentially a mystery contact from Russia, supposedly offering to supply him with an explosive rigged aerial device. Relying entirely upon cellular tower tracking metrics, agents concluded he took the lives of both victims around the 11th of February. Even wilder is the fact that he stayed inside that residence alongside their rotting remains for almost 2 straight weeks before finally making a run for it. Yet regardless of those incredibly disturbing actions and his extreme ideological rants, law enforcement eventually decided that this young man was mostly motivated by sheer greed. Though the initial accusations against him involved grand theft of a Volkswagen Atlas and a .357 Magnum firearm, along with identity fraud for swiping his parents' identification cards to withdraw cash. As expected, however, prosecutors officially slapped him with a pair of top-tier homicide charges, 2 separate allegations of concealing human remains, and a single offense of witness tampering stemming from that classroom moment where he casually mentioned his deadly scheme to a teenage girl. The suspect sat behind bars on a $1 million bail amount, with his official day in court originally scheduled to kick off on the 2nd of March, 2026. Even though the state had built a rock-solid argument against the defendant, legal authorities handed his legal counsel a bargain agreement toward the end of 2025. After speaking with the surviving relatives, everyone agreed that the proposed compromise was totally reasonable. It absolutely secures the lengthy prison timeline we were aiming for all along. Because of that, forcing these grieving relatives to endure a brutal courtroom battle just makes zero sense. Can you share right now what specific punishments your team will push for during the final judgment hearing? Well, in my honest opinion, this scenario demands the absolute harshest sentence available. I fully expect to demand exactly that when the time comes. My mindset has remained entirely focused on securing the strictest outcome since the very moment I filed these documents. Does that mean you believe there is a real possibility he might walk free in 40 or 50 years, returning to our local neighborhoods? Absolutely. Letting a guy like this back onto the streets is a terrible idea, and I plan to fight tooth and nail to prevent his release. Did you happen to speak directly with the defendant himself, or did those conversations only happen with his defense lawyers? People were definitely whispering about whether he truly grasped the severity of the situation today, considering he never finished his secondary education and is not a native speaker of our language. That makes total sense. Looking at how things unfolded on the official transcript, I am completely confident he knew exactly what was going on. For the record, I would absolutely never speak with the suspect one-on-one. All my discussions went straight through his legal representation, and I honestly feel this outcome is a solid win for everyone involved. The teenager officially took the bargain in January of 2026, giving up several constitutional protections so the state would completely drop 8 extra serious offenses. Does it make sense to you, young man, that both you and your legal advocate will have the total freedom to petition the bench for whichever punishment duration you both feel fits the crime in this specific scenario? Absolutely, Your Honor. And am I also right in assuming that you and your lawyer have gone over the exact boundaries and total length of the potential lockup periods? Meaning, what happens if a guilty verdict is handed down for these dual charges of premeditated first-degree murder? Every single one of those allegations brings a mandatory lifelong stay behind bars, completely stripping away any chance of future parole. Are we clear on that fact? Yes, Your Honor. However, looking at it from another angle, the judge does retain the power to potentially grant you a shot at supervised release. Nobody is guaranteeing you will actually get out, but the window to request supervised freedom does open up after you have sat in a cell for at least 20 full years per charge. Are you following me here? I understand, Your Honor. Just to clarify, 20 years is not a mandatory floor, but rather the earliest possible moment a parole board could legally review your case on either charge. Does that make perfect sense to you? It certainly does, Your Honor. Fair enough. And do you believe your defense attorney broke all of this down in a way you fully comprehend? Absolutely, Your Honor. Okay then. At this point, the 18-year-old suspect had completely lost that smug, arrogant vibe he gave off when cops first grilled him right after his international transfer. As a matter of fact, his seat shook visibly throughout the rest of the judicial hearing. This paperwork also indicates you are completely unmedicated and not seeing a doctor for any psychological conditions. Is that a factual statement? Yes, Your Honor. Can you also confirm that you have stayed totally sober without booze, pills, or narcotics over the past 24 hours? That is correct, Your Honor. I completely surrender my right to a jury trial. That is the truth. I understand, Your Honor. I forfeit my privilege against self-incrimination, fully grasping that my silence cannot be held against me in court. That is accurate. Yes, Your Honor. I am relinquishing my option to take the stand or offer any defense exhibits during the proceedings. On February 24th, he took the family SUV, a loaded revolver, and $14,000 in cash and fled across 6 states. He was caught in Waukene, Kansas, on the same night police discovered the bodies back in Wisconsin. A 3-page manifesto titled "Accelerate the Collapse" was found on his phone, outlining plots to assassinate political leaders and ignite societal collapse. He had even confessed his plan to a female classmate weeks before the killings, then threatened her silence. Radicalization does not always look like what we expect. It can hide behind perfect grades and a quiet smile. In January 2026, Nikita pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. Each charge carries a mandatory life sentence with the earliest possible parole review after 20 years per count. His sentencing is scheduled for March 5th, 2026. The prosecution is seeking the harshest penalty available. Our deepest condolences go out to the families of Tatiana and Donald Meyer and to all those who love them. A welfare check on a quiet Wisconsin home revealed 2 decomposing bodies and a teenager long gone. Nikita, 17, was a model student, perfect attendance, top 3 in his class, applying for the National Honor Society. He had immigrated from Moldova in 2017 when his mother, Tatiana, married Wisconsin resident Donald Meyer. Beneath his academic achievements, Nikita was living a secret life inside extremist online forums. He connected with the Order of the Nine Angels, a neo-Nazi accelerationist cult with ties to alleged Russian operatives. In 2023, federal agents had already investigated the household for illicit web activity traced to a family laptop, but closed the file without charges. That brush with federal law enforcement did not stop him. It may have made him bolder. On February 11th, 2025, Nikita shot and killed both his mother and stepfather inside their Waukesha home. He lived alongside their decomposing remains for nearly 2 weeks, continuing to submit schoolwork online to avoid suspicion.